Hello everyone, and welcome to this extra edition of Pulp Crazy. I'm Jason Aiken. In this bonus episode, I will be reviewing Honey West and T.H.E. Cat, A Girl and Her Cat, by Eckert and Matthew Baugh. The novella is published by Moonstone Books and is currently available in a limited edition hardcover, signed by both authors. A paperback edition is available for pre-order, with a release date of June 10th, 2014, showing on Amazon. Now, it's been my experience that these release dates are never final, and are sometimes even delayed. So to me it was a no-brainer, and I ordered the hardcover rather than waiting until June. This is a crossover story that pairs the buxom private eye, Honey West, with Thomas Hewitt Edward Cat, or T.H.E. Cat for short, an ex-cat burglar turned bodyguard. Honey West has appeared in prose, comics, and on television. She originally appeared in novels and was created by Gloria and Forrest Fickling under the pseudonym G.G. Fickling. Her first appearance was in the novel This Girl for Hire in 1957. She was played on television by Anne Francis. She is often described as Mickey Spillane meets Marilyn Monroe. T.H.E. Cat has appeared in comics and television. This is his first prose adventure. His first appearance was in the first episode of his television series titled To Kill a Priest, which aired on September 16, 1966. He was played on television by Robert Loggia. The novella is not short on other crossovers and references. Strong ties to the Wold-Newton universe are present, especially in regards to connections with Eckert stories that appeared in the Green Hornet and the Avenger anthologies published by Moonstone. The main antagonist also bears a strong resemblance to a major character from Philip Jose Farmer's Doc Savage novel, Escape from Loki. If you have been reading Eckert's work up to this point, you owe it to yourself to check this out, as there will be plenty of familiar faces. One of which is a mysterious and powerful Asian crime boss. He's another antagonist. But perhaps my favorite pulp reference was towards a pugilistic sailor who taught Honey how to box. The references and crossovers don't stop with the pulps, though. If you're a fan of 60s TV shows, this is the novella for you. One of the people the novella is devoted to is David McDaniel, the author of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. novels, which featured quite a number of crossovers themselves. These U.N.C.L.E. novels seem to be a big influence on A Girl and Her Cat. As a matter of fact, two thinly disguised characters from the Man from U.N.C.L.E. also make appearances in A Girl and Her Cat. Additionally, there are two references to two films that Anne Francis, who played Honey West on the TV series, was featured in. Rick Lay on the Wold-Newton Facebook group pointed these out. They are Bad Day at Black Rock and The Satan Bug. I'll put links in the show notes to various Wikipedia pages that should be useful when you stumble across a reference you might not recognize. I won't mention them in the review because I don't want to spoil major plot elements, but I will include them at the bottom of the show notes for reference. Don't let the references discourage you, though. Reading this or any other Wool Newton novella is no different than jumping into H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos for the first time, in my opinion. The first time you pick up a Cthulhu mythos story, if you haven't read any previous ones, he may throw out references to other deities, locations, places, people from other stories. And odds are you won't get all those connections if that's the first time you're picking up a H.P. Lovecraft book. When this happens, no matter what book you're reading, I would suggest using an internet search engine when you stumble across a reference that you're not familiar with. But, standing on its own, this is a really fun and steamy action detective tale. The story sees Honey West hired by the beautiful Doctor Fang to recover a stolen vaccine and a pocket watch that belongs to her grandfather, Shan Ming Fu. Honey takes the case, but soon realizes there is more going on than what she was told. International espionage agencies from both sides of the law are involved. She enlists the aid of her friend, T.H.E. Cat, in order to recover the items. My only exposure to these two characters was the 2-issue comic book miniseries written by Trina Robbins, which came out from Moonstone late last year. It takes place before this story and shows how Honey and Cat first met. It's not required reading, though, to enjoy this, but I would recommend it because I did like those 2 issues. There are also 2 bonus features with the hardcover. A Honey West chronology, compiled by Winscott Eckert, and a T.H.E. Cat chronology, compiled by Matthew Baugh. Both were great reads, and I enjoyed reading them after finishing the novella. Definitely pick this up and give it a read, especially if you have been enjoying the recent Moonstone pulp anthologies, or if you are a fan of the 1960s spy TV shows. I read through this novella in one sitting, and I just couldn't put it down. I enjoyed it that much. Wynn read an excerpt from this novella at Pulpfest 2013. I'll include audio from the reading at the end of the episode for you to listen to. In the audio, Wynn introduces the characters and gives some background on them. He then reads from the prologue and first chapter of A Girl and Her Cat. Afterwards, he does a Q&A with the audience. I'll include links in the show notes where you can purchase Honey West and T.H.E. Cat, A Girl and Her Cat. Here's Wynn from Pulpfest 2013. Enjoy.
So I think we have time. Would you like to hear about a same length reading from the Honey West T.H.E. Cat novel, A Girl and Her Cat? So this book is not yet available, not yet published, but it should be solicited for ordering fairly soon. And we're waiting for completion of the final cover art, which I'm told should be any day now. And then the publisher, Moonstone Books, will be putting out the pre-order. They need the cover art in order to place it in the diamond previews and so forth. But for those of you who may not be familiar with Honey West and or T.H.E. Cat, and I don't know if you can see this, this is not the final cover art, but here is a Honey West paperback book cover and a comic book cover, a photo cover of T.H.E. Cat, which was a television series that ran for one season in the 1960s with Robert Loggia as Thomas Hewitt Edward Cat, the cat burglar. So the Honey West project is an interesting one to me. It's a lot of fun. And the Moonstone version of Honey West, we're being very faithful to the paperback novels, of which there were 11 written by G.G. Fickling, which is a pseudonym for a husband and wife writing team of Skip and Gloria Fickling. There were 11 Honey West novels from 1957 until 1971. Most of them published between 1957 and 1964, and then there was a break, and then 2 more were published in the early 70s. And in between that break of novels, there was a television series that also ran for 1 season with Anne Francis as Honey West. And so what we've done with the Moonstone version is actually taken the best of both versions. So what you'll see in our novel is an amalgamation. It's definitely the Honey West of the paperback series, and I constructed, as I usually do, a Honey West chronology to make sure that I was getting the order of events right and the placement of our novel correct within the timeline of the other stories. And again, referring both to the events of the novels and the TV series and trying to sort of smooth out the continuity between both of those. And of course, we're also honoring the continuity and the timeline of T.H.E. Cat. An interesting other tidbit about Honey West is that the last novel in the 60s, 1964, she's a private detective, as she always has been since the 50s, but this novel, Bombshell in 1964, she is in a typical sort of PI case, private eye case, but she gets drawn into a sort of very James Bondian type of scenario in which she goes up against American Nazis in Florida who have hijacked a nuclear submarine, and she also meets for the first time Johnny Doom, who also then kind of goes on and becomes a secret agent. In the last 2 novels in the early 70s, we find Honey West. She is a full-fledged secret agent now. She's working for the CIA. There's not a transition between the 64 novel and the 71 novels. And so we saw that as an opportunity to kind of bridge that gap. Clearly, she did not immediately become a secret agent, as her friend Johnny Doom did, because she had the events of the TV series, which followed that 1964 exodus. And because of that, it's clear that she continued to be a private eye for at least another couple of years, and then was kind of pulled into that secret agent James Bond kind of world again. And so we kind of take that tack with our novel, A Girl and Her Cat. And I will share with you, if you can see this, and I apologize that it is hard to see. This is the initial cover sketch for the cover of the book. So this will turn into the painting. This is a cover sketch by Doug Klauba, who has done a lot of really great covers, such as The Green Hornet and The Phantom, Kolchak, Zorro, and so forth. So that's kind of the setup for A Girl and Her Cat. And then Thomas Hewitt Edward Cat, again, is a reformed cat burglar turned bodyguard who works in San Francisco during the same time frame. So I'll start with the prologue, which takes place in June 1967. And then we will jump back in time a couple of days. So really the prologue kind of dumps you right in the middle of the action, right in the middle of the story. And then with chapter 1, we'll go back to a few days earlier. And I'm not going to read this in my best Anne Francis voice, despite the fact that this is written in first person. I awoke to the cool bossa nova strains of The Girl from Ipanema. I was laid out on the floor. It was also cool, downright cold, in fact. Even in summertime, a tile floor is going to be cold, especially in San Francisco, if that's where I still was. I stretched experimentally before sitting up. My head felt like one of my cashmere sweaters, washed, wrung, and hung out to dry. Speaking of my cashmere sweater, I slipped my hands down around my 38, 22, 36 assets. It was there. The sweater, I mean. And my skirt, both still clung tightly to every curve. Saying that in a man's voice probably does not work that well, and I do apologize for that.
It's very different. It would work in San Francisco.
I have a tendency to lose these things, and more, especially before or after waking up in strange places. The last thing I remembered, I was wearing a short satin robe and nothing else. So being fully clothed was a bonus. Things were going well. Another bonus, the room was dimly lit, keeping the pounding of my skull from becoming TNT explosions. I scoped the place out a bit before venturing onto my feet. Dripping candles on wrought iron sconces bracketed the small space. There didn't seem to be any electric lights in the room. More ornate ironwork, of some Arabian design, decorated the small window. Was it secure enough to prevent escape? A small washstand stood alone in the corner. Hand towels in an intricate Turkish pattern were neatly stacked by the sink. A variety of perfume bottles peppered the counter opposite the towels. On a ledge above the sink, under a gilt silver mirror, a lump of frankincense burned on a hot coal. It smelled like hojari, good for a cold, damp climate like Frisco's, if I was still in Frisco. I rolled over to see what was behind me, opposite the washstand. A stall, the wooden door elaborately carved in a design that made me think of gypsies. Just under the door, I could see the base of a commode. Fortunately, it was unoccupied. A ladies' room. I had been laid out on the floor of the ladies' room and God knows where. I moved unsteadily to the sink and splashed some water on my face. The hand towels were perfumed. Nice touch. I stumbled to the door, fumbled with the knob, and lurched out into an equally dim nightclub. More large candles filled the place. There was no other lighting, but the candles were enough. To my right, I could see a small jazz combo, still sketching out Ipanema. The bass player wore a black beret and a goatee. The singer was hauntingly beautiful. She might have been straight from Brazil. In front of me, across the room and slightly to my left, a wide set of stone steps led up to what was presumably the exit, doors covered in scrolling wrought iron similar to that in the bathroom. I always look for the exit first. Small tables, illuminated by lamps with tea candles, were arranged around the room. Couples held hands and sipped martinis. Swords, knives, maces, and axes adorned the walls, framed by luxuriant tapestries. The whole place screamed a bohemian. I wavered a bit again. The room went dark for me for a moment. When my eyes started working again, I was down on one knee. I looked up to see a good-looking guy standing over me. He was tall with straight dark hair and wore a black blazer with a white dress shirt and a black cravat. He was slender, but I could sense the powerfully coiled muscles concealed under the evening wear. My mind was still vague. I thought I recognized him, but my mouth hadn't caught up with my brain. I asked, "Who?" He held out a hand to help me up. "Cat," he answered. T. Hewitt Edward Cat. The band switched to something more brassy, with a flute and bongos, something like a Lalo Schifrin tune. I took his hand. And that's the prologue. If any of you have ever seen The Cat, and maybe you haven't, Art's nodding. Art gets it. So we'll jump back to a few days earlier. One of the characters who recurs in the Honey West novels is a lieutenant by the name of Mark Storm, Lieutenant Mark Storm. And he is a character who is available to us to work with the Honey West novels. And Matthew Baugh and I, Matthew is my co-writer on this book, decided that we had plenty of characters going on and that was a little bit too much to juggle, and we had some other characters that we wanted to deal with. So we don't really use Mark Storm much in this book. Something else that's very interesting is in the 1970 novel, it explains that Mark Storm had proposed marriage to Honey. She had declined, they had fought, and then not seen each other for years until 1971. And so I'm going to skip over that scene, but that scene is in here where they have to fight. and they part ways for many years. And that's our way of eliminating and not dealing with Mark Storm. Again, fitting continuity. I'll also say that Mark Storm, in my reading of the novels, is a complete asshole. And didn't really like the character and didn't really want to spend very much time writing him. He's kind of that kind of guy who is always bugging Honey to get married, stay home, and have kids, and why is she going out and doing this private eye thing? And she's always sort of thumbing her nose at him and getting in trouble, and he's not very kind to her, actually, even though she solves murder after murder after murder. So another reason for not using him. So Honey has had a fight with Mark. She's upset. She goes back to her apartment and begins to become embroiled in the adventure of a girl and her cat. At home, I fed Bruce and made myself a drink. I stretched out the boots on the radiator and hoped for the best. Her boots had just got ruined in the rain. I ran a hot shower and stood under it for 15 minutes, trying to warm up from the chilly, rain-drenched walk home. I liked Mark, even had some feelings for the guy, but it was never going to work. Bruce is the ocelot, by the way. Bruce is the pet ocelot, Honey West's pet from the TV series. Bruce curled up outside the tub, waiting and purring. I figured the only man I needed in my life was the furry, four-legged kind. Bruce is an ocelot. Some might think it's odd that I keep a pet ocelot, but I love him and I'm an odd girl, so guilty as charged. Not that I spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think. I turned off the shower, felt around in the steam for the towels, and wrapped one around my dripping hair. I tried to tie the other towel around my chest, and it came undone. I needed to get some bigger towels. I topped off my drink and climbed in bed. Bruce jumped up and took over the other side of the bed, which was fine by me. I rubbed him behind the ears, and he started purring again, loudly. I lay there in the dark, reached for my drink on the nightstand, took a few more sips, and lay there some more, wide awake. Why did every man I worked with want to marry me? Mark had been after me for years. Sam Bolt, smart guy, had worked for me as a part-time investigator for about a year, maybe a little more. We had argued here and there, but had also flirted, and that's the way I liked it. Light, breezy. Then he had wanted to get married. Maybe I'd known it all along, but it was the same old story. Let's get married, I'll take over the business, you can run things here at the office. Not a chance, Buster. And then there was newsman Fred Sims. Like Mark, he had also known my father. He was a vet, wounded in the war, and walked with a cane. He was generally quiet and reserved with me, and I had always wondered if he was embarrassed by the cane. I also had the feeling he was interested in me, though he kept it to himself. I really only got an inkling of it when he and Mark and I spent time together, and our conversation took a bawdy turn as the boys competed for my attention. I enjoyed our innocent flirtations, although perhaps it was not so innocent on Fred's part. Why all these men wanted to tie me down, try to capture something they couldn't have, was beyond me. I had made it clear, and often, it wasn't happening. The only one I hadn't had to fend off was Charlie April, the gravelly voice on the other end of my answering service. Of course, I hardly ever saw the guy in person, and as far as I knew, he had no interest in any women. Either he was too busy for it, running his bookie service, or whatever it was, I didn't ask too many questions about it, or he didn't like girls, or both. None of my business either way, and that's the way I liked it. Clean, simple, untangled. Anyway, tonight with Mark had been the last straw. I stared at the ceiling. It was 2 a.m. I stared at the ceiling some more. I gave up, threw on some tight leopard print capris and a black sweater, and hooked a leash to Bruce's collar. We walked downstairs. The rain had stopped and the air was clean and crisp. The stars twinkled. I put down the top on the Cobra, threw it in gear, and drove 3 blocks to the office. Bruce sat in the passenger seat. The streets were empty this early in the morning, and no one was out and about to gawk at us. People gawked when we drove around like this in broad daylight. We liked it. I parked in the alley behind the office. Bruce perked up as we stopped, recognizing the familiar destination. I took his leash, went up 3 flights, unlocked the door, and flipped on the desk lamp. Bruce left some water from a bowl on the floor, and I settled in behind the desk to pay some overdue bills. I put the bills in the outbox and opened my current case files. I tried hard to focus on the work. There was a divorce case which I would have rather not taken, but I needed the dough, and an insurance fraud case. I hadn't tripped over a dead body in months. Honey West, Danger Girl, that was me. The ship's horn gave forth a mournful wail from Long Beach Harbor. There was a knock on the door. It was 3:15 a.m. and I was alone in a deserted office building with no night watchman, burning the midnight oil. My desk light shone through the door's frosted glass and under the door frame, so whoever was on the other side could tell the office was occupied and was polite enough to give a warning knock. But in this business, you don't take any chances. I reached into my purse, grabbed my pearl handle 22, and held it in readiness under the desk. "Come in," I said. The door opened. The shadowy figure framed in the doorway looked curvy, but I didn't let my guard down. A woman can fire a gun just as well as a man. I was proof of that. "Would you mind stepping into the light?" I said. I swiveled the desk lamp toward the visitor and caught her in a pool of yellow light. She was an Asian knockout. Long, glossy black hair fell straight down both sides of her face. Her almond-shaped eyes were a piercing cat green. She wore a short, belted raincoat and black boots. The way I said all-American girl, she said exotic, and maybe even dangerous. She wasn't holding a gun or a knife or anything else in her hand, so I invited her to sit. "A bit late, or early, for a business call," I said. "I wish to hire you to recover stolen property," she said. "Okay, so much for small talk." "I might be for hire," I said. "Who am I working for?" "My name is Isabella Fang." Her voice was cold. "Fang?" I restrained a smile, imagining this woman as a she-Dracula. The image fit her. "It is not an uncommon Chinese name," she said, the chill deepening in her voice. "Sorry," I said. "Now, Miss Fang—" "Miss West," she interrupted. "I have a doctorate in biochemistry from UC Berkeley, a doctorate in botany from Oxford, and a doctorate in medicine from Johns Hopkins. You may address me as Dr. Fang." I didn't care for the way she condescended, but this isn't a business where you always get to like your clients. I decided to let it slide. "That's an impressive resume, doctor," I said. "So what can I do for you?" "I need your help in recovering something that was taken from me." "Have you been to the police?" I asked. "They're the real experts with stolen property." "The police cannot help," she replied, producing a pack of red apple cigarettes in a long black holder. "I cannot prove that the property is mine." "Okay," I said. "How does that work?" She placed a slender cigarette in the tip of the holder, lighted it, and took a drag before answering. "Ah, forgive me," she said coyly. She blinked those unnerving green eyes at me. "Would you like one?" I shook my head. "I'm a research chemist," Dr. Fang continued. "I spent many years developing a vaccine for rubella. The only samples were stolen from my San Francisco laboratory." That sounded familiar to me. I'd read a magazine article about vaccines a while back. They'd finally found one that was good for mumps and were making real progress with measles and rubella, which sounded great to me. "You have the formula, right?" I asked. "Can't you recreate it?" "Developing the vaccine took years, Miss West," she said. I suppose she could have said it with more disdain if she had really just tried a little bit harder. "Could we please confine ourselves to matters in which you actually can be of service?" I bit back my real reply and said, "Sure, just trying to gather all the facts, doctor. Any idea who stole your vaccine samples?" "In fact, I do," Fang said. "A rival scientist named Stippier, Dr. Carl Stippier. He wishes to take credit for my discovery." "I see," I said, although I didn't, really. "Anything else?" "Yes, when the thieves broke into my laboratory, they also stole an heirloom. My grandfather's antique pocket watch. I wish you to recover that as well." "Care to share any details?" I asked. "A description of the pocket watch? Anything else you have on Stippier?" She must have been aware I was dubious, because the check she handed me was designed to settle most of my doubts. I hadn't seen so many zeros since I'd been hired by the Marriott Beverly during a Shriners convention. Still, there was something bothering me. "I don't get it," I said. "Why come all the way to Los Angeles to hire a detective for a case in Frisco?" You are uniquely qualified for this, Miss West," Dr. Fang replied. "Dr. Stippier has a weakness for attractive women who are bountifully endowed. There are not any female private investigators in San Francisco." "If you don't mind my saying so," I said, "you fit that description pretty well yourself." "Dr. Stippier is a racist," she replied. I heard a touch of anger in her voice, which she covered by expelling a long stream of smoke. "Neither I, nor anyone who looks remotely like me, is allowed on his premises." "But taffy blonde, blue-eyed, little old me." She smiled for the first time in our little interview. "Precisely." That's it. Did you want to share something with us?
What was she like?
Any questions?
Well, what prompted the crossover between Honey West and T.H.E. Cat?
That's a great question. As some of you may know, I really enjoy writing crossovers and have a bit of an affinity for crossovers. And when I was approached by Moonstone to write a Honey West story, I asked Joe Gentile, the publisher, is there a character you have licensed or is available that we could actually do a Honey West crossover? And we thought about it for a little while because this is obviously in the 60s. A lot of the properties that Moonstone have are in the 40s. And so we wanted to try to make sure to locate and find a property that fit the time frame and wasn't going to be forced from a chronological perspective. Interestingly, Moonstone is already doing a series of Honey West comics, and they had already commissioned and had a script in hand for a 2-issue comic series of Honey West and the Cat, and T.H.E. Cat. And actually the first issue of that now is already out now, and we're awaiting the second issue. So what Joe suggested to me is, well, you could do Honey West and the Cat, you just have to have it be following that comic series. And so they've already met. And so when Honey meets the Cat in this novella, she will already have worked with him once from the Moonstone series about a year prior. And it just kind of all fell into place. They're two really interesting characters that we were looking forward to juxtaposing, sort of the handsome bodyguard guy and do-it-yourself, plucky private investigator, and kind of see how they mix. Lucas?
Considering that T.H.E. Cat and Honey West were pretty much one season series, even though we're seeing elements of the paperback, could this be considered by the fans as a further continuation, at least paperback-wise or story-wise, of what could have happened if those series had survived cancellation?
If you, as a fan, would like to consider this story as a canonical adventure of Honey West, I absolutely invite you to do so. I mean, this is a licensed work, and so this is an authorized Honey West novel, and I'm looking forward to having it be the 12th Honey West novel.
You probably ought to also mention that Wilmington people may find this story interesting.
Wilmington people might find this story interesting. For those not familiar with Wilmington, just very briefly, it's a shared universe in which characters can interact with each other and coexist and have adventures together. It's not merely about crossovers. It stems from an event which led to a Woldman family of interrelated heroes and villains. We're certainly not saying that Honey West or T.H.E. Cat are members of the Woldman family at all. But it is absolutely possible that in the course of this novel that they will encounter maybe some of the more nefarious or insidious representatives of the Wold Newton family. Rick, you want to say
You
something?
mentioned that it connects to the Green Hornet stories.
That's a great point, Rick. Dr. Fang, who has just hired Honey West to recover the vaccine as well as a very precious pocket watch, is also a character in two of my Green Hornet stories, which also appeared in Moonstone Books. So the first one was called Fang and Sting and took place in 1964, and that was Green Hornet versus Dr. Fang. This story, the Honey West tale, takes place in 1967. I am not going to explain in the Honey West story why Dr. Fang is still alive after she apparently met her death in the 1964 Green Hornet story. That is a tale for another day. And then in the Green Hornet Progress story, which was in the third Green Hornet book, Dr. Fang actually comes back and meets up with the Green Hornet again in a very different way in the 1970s.
Speaking of the Green Hornet, I couldn't help but notice in the first thing you read from that Pat Wildman thought about a martial arts instructor that she had when she was a young girl in Detroit. I
Yes.
thought that was kind of interesting. It made me think of the Green Hornet for some reason.
And could you tell me a little bit more about why that made you think of the Green Hornet?
I don't know. I just know that the Green Hornet took place in Detroit, and it was a two-man team up there. Had a partner of Asian descent who was also a martial arts expert, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if there's a connection there, but
There is a connection there, Chuck, and you are brilliant. Brilliant for pointing out, yes. Pat Wildman, just like her father, learned from many different tutors and instructors in many different arts. And so if you know anything about Doc Wildman, he was trained from birth to be a hero and learned many different arts, both physical and mental and academic, and he gave the same type of education to his daughter. And so, yeah, he absolutely sent his daughter, Pat, to work with and learn from a respected Asian master of martial arts whose exploits were recorded in one season of a television series from 1966 to 1967, which was produced, I think, by the same folks who produced the Batman TV series in that era. Other questions? Anything for John about his adventure story?
I think we'll find out about what the details of Pocket Watch.
Yeah, well, you're a pretty big fan of some of Philip Jose Farmer's Wold Newton books, aren't you, Lucas?
So I will not. I have
There's one novel in particular, one of the Wold Newton series that was reprinted by Titan Books last year, in which pocket watches feature. That was called The Other Log of Phileas Fogg. There might be a connection. Yeah.
Some of the fun for me, obviously, of shows like Honey West and T.H.E. and others that you and I like to talk about is just sort of fun element, fun like conventions, I guess, of that era, like little gadgets and space age connected, either fashion or design or villainous plots,
Right.
And I just wonder how much of those sorts of conventions or elements did you get to have fun with in your crossover?
In the Honey West?
Yeah,
as many as we could humanly think of. There's also an interesting, another interesting aspect to this book. If any of you are familiar with the Man from Uncle Tyan novels, which came out in the 1960s, there was a writer who participated in that series named David McDaniel, and he had a lot of fun with those novels, throwing in a lot of references. And in one of those novels, called The Rainbow Affair, It took place in May 1967, which interestingly is 1 month before the events of this book, which is June 1967. In that novel, one of the subplots had to do with Thrush. And Thrush is sort of that evil organization that U.N.C.L.E fought against in the 1960s, trying to take over the world. Thrush had been attempting to recruit Fu Manchu to join their ranks. And of course, Fu Manchu was not named in the Rainbow Affair novel due to copyright issues. But they were trying to recruit Fu Manchu, which is a really interesting point connected to the point that you made earlier, Rick, about how Fu Manchu moving into the 1960s would have been sort of overshadowed by many of the other things, and maybe wouldn't be so grandiose in the if he had actually had adventures in the 1960s, because you had communism and all of these other things were really overshadowing the believability of his ability to take over the world, right? And so if you extrapolate that into this other realm, by the 1960s, Fu Manchu and the C-Fan are competing with Thrush, and they're competing with Spectre, James Bond Spectre, and all of these other organizations. And so in that novel, they're trying to get him to join them. They fail, but it's very clear that they're going to be continuing to try to recruit him. And that subplot is actually carried forward in A Girl and Her Cat. So we're playing with some of those conventions. And you're familiar, I mean, you watched the Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV series as well, right? So we have some cameos in this book in the David McDaniel tradition, where they, you know who they are, but they can't be named. Two agents of an international law enforcement agency show up a couple of times. One of them is black-haired and very dapper, wears a gray suit. His partner is a blonde Russian guy who wears a turtleneck, and they drive a silver Piranha sports car. Yeah, we try to have fun with it. Sir.
Was McDaniels the author of the Dagger Affair?
He was. Okay. That's exactly right.
Most detailed background of Thrush you ever got.
That's exactly right. He wrote the Dagger Affair. That was the first one. Yeah. And in that, he gives a very detailed background of Thrush, as you point out, and basically reveals to us that Thrush arose from the ashes of the late Professor Moriarty's organization after Professor Moriarty's death in 1891. And so then some of the people who were left over in that organization, eventually it evolved into Thrush. And of course, Rick has also documented some of the different variants of that organization through time as it became Thrush or had offshoots as well, too. And we are way over, and fortunately there was no one, I guess, after us, so I apologize for going over. But if there are more questions, or if not, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/pulpcast. You can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.